So this is a story of how I got my mortgage company to write me a check for $130,000. And we're going to talk about that today. Hey everyone, my name is Jeremy, and if you like learning how to build wealth and follow along my journey of wealth building, then this is a channel for you. Subscribe, hit that bell icon so you don't miss a thing. All right, so this is a story about how I took a mortgage that was valued around $208,000 when I first signed the documents in 2007, and basically get the bank to forgive literally $130,000 in 2014. Now, this is a story about how that happened. I'm going to try to give you as many details as I can. Okay, so in 2007, I was working at a local high school doing IT support and making around $60,000, which for education was very good pay. One single location making $60,000. I got in my head that I was going to build a house. Now, my father is a contractor, and he told all of us kids that he would help us build a house. We buy the lot, we buy all the materials, and he would basically waive his contractor fee. We did that. 2007, I found a lot, and I got a mortgage, and I built a house. Now, if you know, 2007, that was right at the peak of the boom and everything. And I took on a mortgage for $208,000. Looking back, it was ridiculous, and I should have never done that. It was basically about half of my take-home pay every month went into paying for my mortgage. I was house broke. Now, granted, I have a nice house, granite countertops, 10-foot ceilings, nice large back screened-in porch. It's a beautiful house. I love the house, but it was more house than I could afford at the time. In 2011, I left my full-time job at that high school to pursue freelance, working for myself, building websites by myself, no job security. And I would tell you that that first year went very well. I had plenty of business. There was no issues with paying for my mortgage, none of that. Flash forward to 2013. Now, 2013 was not a good year for me. Business dried up, I had difficulty paying bills, and I got behind on my mortgage. So 2013, I believe it was about October, was when I missed my first mortgage payment. Couldn't make the payment, and so I just didn't send it. By that time, I had basically gotten out of all of my debt except for student loans, and student loans weren't much, $130-something a month. But I ate out a lot. I spent way more money than I should have on a lot of things. Irregardless, I couldn't make my payments for my mortgage in 2013, October. I missed my payment, first payment, October 2013. I missed it November, December, January of 2014 missed it, February missed it. About mid-February, I got the old knock on the door. If anybody has gone through this, then you know exactly what that is. That was somebody at the door with papers because the bank decided to file foreclosure on my property. It was not a good time. Any of you have gone through that, then you know exactly what it is. It's scary. It's just a lot of emotions to go along with it. Now, in those documents, it basically gave me 20 days to respond to these documents. 20 days. That is it. 20 days, and then if you don't protest it, then it just goes on and they foreclose. Looking through the paperwork of these documents, I'm not one to just sit down and roll over and just go with the flow. I just started researching because that's what I do. I like to learn, and I started reading up and looking through the documents, looking at what other people's experiences were like. In this process, this is during that time, 2013, you know, it was still in that time where there was a program called Making Home Affordable. It was a law that was enacted right in 2008 after the crash of the housing bubble. It basically gave the banks the ability to modify mortgages, to reduce payment. I don't remember what the right percentage is. Reduce the payments down to something affordable, and typically they would tag that amount onto the back of the mortgage. Sometimes the federal government would buy those notes. I did not have a federal backed mortgage at the time, so some of this was not possible based on the type of mortgage that I had. But I say all of that to say that I went through the process, tried to get a modification on my mortgage multiple times. So I filed paperwork. They wanted to see records of my income. I would jump through all of these hoops, and then I would get a letter that said, I'm sorry, the time frame for processing this is expired. You'll need to resubmit all your paperwork. Looking back, this was a tactic that the bank used to just basically prolong everything and try to frustrate everybody. And so I had been trying to do that since November to try to get things modified so that I could actually afford the home that I was in. Obviously the bank kept pushing that back, and then they filed for foreclosure documents. And what I did was I basically researched everything that I could find to try to determine what legal standing I would have to, at this time I was just thinking, try to prolong it as long as possible so that I could stay in my home and figure out what exactly I was going to do. I did not have much equity in the house. Like I said, my mortgage was $208,000, and it was probably, the home was probably worth $195,000 because of the crash and everything. So I had no equity in the house, really wouldn't be able to sell it. And so what I noticed going through all of my paperwork was that when you get foreclosure documents, one of the things that has to happen is somebody who owns the note has to go through and do a tally, a record of all the payments that were made, and then determine what your, they call it indebtedness, what your indebtedness is. And I noticed in this documentation of indebtedness that they were missing 2 years worth of payments. So all of their records were from 2008 to 2013 or whatever was current at that time. So they had like a year and a half, because before the original note I had a construction loan. So there was like a year and a half of payments that were just missing. Okay, so as I was going through this editing, there was another piece of this puzzle that I forgot to mention here, and I think it's important. So one of the other things that's important in any contract law is that you have to produce the original contract note that presumably has everyone's fingerprints on it. And that was the other piece of these foreclosure documents, was that the bank basically said that they couldn't produce the original document. They couldn't find it. So this was during that time when mortgages were being sold all over the place. Banks were buying big lots of mortgages, and they were not transferring the original loan documents. They were just basically keeping scanned documents, which is a big no-no. And I came upon that during research, and so that was another legal ground that I tried to stand on. But let's get back to it. And so looking through the documentation, that was basically the leg that I tried to stand on. Researched, and I filled out my own brief, and I forget what they actually call it. I could probably find the document here because I saved everything. So basically what I did was I challenged their accounting within all of my documentation. I had to go to court. At some point they just basically ignored the documentation. My first response to their initial foreclosure documents, I submitted all of that, and then obviously they have 20 days to respond to that. They responded and basically asked the court for summary judgment of foreclosure, basically saying, listen, he doesn't have any grounds to stand on. We want this to be done. We want you to rule in our favor and give us back the home. So obviously I had to go to court. A court date was assigned. I went to that court date, and it was done in not like a typical you would see with jury and all of that. We went into the judge's chambers, and their representative was actually on the phone with us. So the judge was in the room, I was in the room representing myself, and their attorney was on the phone. During that whole process, I basically challenged that their accounting was wrong, that their accounting was missing information, and I was challenging the summary judgment request based on those grounds. Now, by this time it was about May or June. I think it was the end of May. Whenever we sat down in the judge's chambers, they were trying to do the final thing to get the house back. We went into the judge's chambers, and he basically said there's enough grounds on what I challenged that he would not file for summary judgment. And what he would do is require the person that signed my documents that said, that's called the affidavit of indebtedness. It's basically that person is putting their stamp and their signature on the paperwork saying, this is what Jeremy owes us, and this is what we're requesting during the process. And so basically what the judge said was, I'm not going to file for judgment on this. We are going to go to trial. I will require that the guy that put his signature on that paperwork needs to show up in court to be able to answer Jeremy's question, to basically satisfy the court that the accounting is true and accurate. Okay, so that was like the end of May. I believe it was 2 weeks later that I got a letter in the mail. I'm gonna pull it up actually. So I got a letter in the mail dated June 19th. So it was probably a week or two, because it might have been the beginning of June when we went to court. And it was a modification offer. Out of the blue. Because I told you I tried to apply for a hardship modification offer 4 times. 4 times I tried to do it. And every time they basically blew it off, and then the time expired. At least that's what they told us. And they couldn't do a modification. Now I get this random out of the blue modification offer, and I'm not going to tell you what the bank is, but essentially they wanted to, I'm trying to look at the terms of the modification. Here we go. So they are basically modifying the terms of the mortgage. Now the mortgage was $208. I think I'd paid it down to $192, $194. Then they had tagged on a bunch of attorney fees and late charges and interest and all that. That was part of that whole foreclosure piece. The modification offer was to modify the mortgage to $57,904.68. And so there was the second piece of this was that my interest rate, which was 6 3/4, would be modified to 1.625% for 12 months. Then it would go to 3% for another 12 months, and then for the remainder of the balance, it would be 6 3/4% for 40 months. So they changed the term from 30 years to 40 years, started the clock all over at 40 years, and then there was those steps in interest, the interest rate schedule, and then it basically took the principal balance from $292 at the time down to $57,000. So I'm reading over these documents and I'm saying, how in the world is this possible? I'm looking through all the fine print, read a lot of contracts over the years, so I'm going through it saying something, they're tagging it on somewhere in here, they're adding that on. But no, that wasn't in there anywhere. So I did the only logical thing, and I found a foreclosure attorney, and I called him and asked for a consultation. It was free. He did it over the phone. And I told him basically the story in a nutshell. And I read through him the documentation that he got me. And his response was, if that's true and accurate, that is the best deal that I've ever seen. If I were you, I would sign it and return it to them as fast as possible. So one of the things I had to do was get this document notarized. So I decided to go to one of their branches because I didn't want there to be any issue. Later on they say, oh no, that's not true and accurate. I went to one of their branches, got the documents notarized with witnesses and all of that, and sent it back to him. I guess it was a month later probably, I got my new bill, and it showed a principal balance of $57,000, whatever the amount was from that document. However, a couple lines down, there was a place that basically tagged on an extra $30,000 balloon payment at the end. And so I'm looking at this, I go back to my documentation, and I'm looking at all of this, and I don't see that balloon payment anywhere in the documentation. So I call up the number, and I speak to the representative. I believe I spoke to the person that was in charge of the modification department, and I explained to her what's going on. And she says, oh yes sir, that's normal. If you look on page, hang on, let me pull your document up. And she, probably got on her computer or whatever, pulled up the document. She said, and if you look on page, and then she stopped. She said, huh, that's not in there. Normally that's on page 4, but yours says 0. I said, yes ma'am, that's what I was trying to say, and that's why I don't understand why this is on here. She said, I've never seen this before. Can I call you back? And she got off the phone, and about 45 minutes later, she called me back, and she said, yes sir, you are correct. We will adjust that, and you will see that reflected on your next statement. And sure enough, the next statement came in, and it was true and accurate. Now, the other stipulation of the modification was that I could not refinance it for 3 years. Basically, during that step of the interest rates going back up, I couldn't refinance it. So I didn't. And I paid my mortgage for 3 more years, 2014, 2015, 2016, and then I refinanced my mortgage to a 3.25% fixed 15-year loan, and that's where I'm at right now. Now, probably if anyone knows anything about loan forgivenesses, that you're probably saying, whoa, does that mean you had, because I told you that they forgave $130,000 and some change. I could probably tell you exactly what the number is. I'm sure that I kept it. Anyway, I won't try to track it down. It was $130,000 and some change. Because at the end of the year, I got a 1099 from the bank for $130,000. And you're probably thinking, does that mean you had to pay taxes on $130,000? Because that would be a hefty tax bill. And you're right, it would. But 2014 was the last year of the called Making Home Affordable Act. I think that's what it was called. Basically, any modification amount that you got that was given to you, 1099, because basically they're giving me that money to forgive the loan, was tax-free. I did not have to pay taxes on it. And so here I sit, $130,000 given to me, a home that was worth $240,000, and I basically won the lottery. And I freely admit that. I am a believer in Jesus Christ, so I give all the glory to God. I believe it was just a massive, true blessing from Him. And I've speculated and wondered what the reason was. Why, when I went to court, all of a sudden everything changed. And the only thing that happened in court was that the judge ordered the person that signed that affidavit to show up in court to testify on what he essentially testified on paper anyway. And here's my speculation. If you go back to that time frame, I believe it was Bank of America, there was a couple large banks that were fined billions, with a B, billions of dollars for something called Robosigning. And essentially what they were doing was generating these affidavits of indebtedness and then stamping a signature on it when that person never actually reviewed those documents. This particular bank, the bank that I had my mortgage in, was not one of those that was sued and fined. And the only thing that I can think of was that likely this bank was doing the exact same thing. They were likely robo-signing. I don't know that for sure, so don't take my word on that. This is mere speculation. But is it possible that this bank was doing the same thing, and had their representative showed up to court and answered questions about my account and signing of my documents, would the truth have come out that maybe they were doing the same thing, and then they were going to be responsible for that giant hefty fine as well if anybody found out? Again, speculation, I don't know, but it just seemed very odd that after trying to modify my mortgage for as long as I did, it never happened, and then boom, all of a sudden it was forgiven, essentially. And so that's where I'm at now. Fast forward 6 years later, the home could be paid off today if I want to. That was a huge, giant blessing. It definitely increased my net worth by $130,000, and I have never forgot that. I have been much more frugal with my income. I have saved a lot more money. I am investing a lot more money, and this is just one way that I have sort of gone on the road of financial independence and building wealth. And I've got some more stories to tell you, not about mortgage, but sort of how I make money online through assets and passive investments. And that's what we're going to talk about as we go along through this channel. So I hope you found that entertaining. I hope it gave you some wisdom and some hope. I hope that you subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell icon so you don't miss any of these videos. Thanks so much for watching. Check that video out if you haven't seen it. I appreciate you watching. I'll see you on the next one.